Report with your host, Benjamin Wright. That's W-R-I-G-H-T. Homelessness and Housing Policy, the right way. Hello and welcome to the Wright Report Week in Review. On the Week in Review here at the Wright Report, we bring you weekly headline reports of homeless news and housing policy in the Denver metro area. In addition to the Week in Review, we will also produce some in-depth reports on various news items, as time and technology, well, I guess what you might call talent here, allow. To find other episodes, visit us on YouTube at The Wright Report. That's THEWRIGHTREPORT.
Can you keep a secret?
What do you think?
We here at The Wright Report want you to be better informed by reviewing the news coverage of homelessness and housing policy, paying attention to how that coverage is framed and who framed it, hence the commentary, and with a little luck have some fun along the way. So let's get it right with The Wright Report. That's WRIGHT. And now, to the headlines. Denverites face possible return to homelessness as vouchers expire, highlighting complexity of city's challenge. 2022 housing surge, move people indoors, but dozens will lose assistance soon. Commentary. This article is full of PR tricks. We'll try to call a few of them out as we go along here, and then sum things up afterwards. For example, this is an updated headline of what was actually released in the print version of the Post. The original headline is as follows. Dozens facing possible return to homelessness. Rapid rehousing vouchers have provided help but are expiring. So why would they so drastically change? So I got a side-by-side of these titles here, so let me get that pulled up here. There we go. So let's start with the editorial framing used in the headlines. Note the difference between the words dozens and Denverites. The word Denverites is hiding the scale of the problem. And the word Denverites is hiding the scale of the problem. This is by editorial intent, or they would have not have taken the time to change the title of the article. Newspaper folks are busy. They don't have time to change the titles of their articles over and over, so in the times that they do, they have an intent. And rather than the plain and simple meaning that the vouchers are expiring, the new title frames expiring vouchers with the addition of how complex providing housing for folks is. So your focus winds up becoming less about expiring vouchers and maybe asking why those vouchers would be expiring in the first place, and changing your focus onto how complex things are and how little you understand. Designed to frame what you're receiving, so you reprioritize the things that the reporters wrote in. Were you aware that reporters do not title their own articles? Typically, that's done by the editorial staff. They turn the article in, and then the editors frame the title in whatever way they think is necessary. That's enough for now. On to the article. Denver homeless advocates this month have demanded that city leaders step in to help 42 people who faced a potential return to the streets, 2 years after the city worked with service providers to move them into subsidized housing. The rapid rehousing vouchers they received, providing significant monthly rent support, are now expiring, highlighting what advocates see as a limitation in such short-term solutions to homelessness. Members of Housekeys Action Network Denver held up signs during the Denver City Council April 15th meeting. Members of Housekeys Action Network Denver held up signs during the Denver City Council April 15th meeting that repurposed the In-Out Burger chain's logo with the wording inside and out on the street again. Officials with the city's housing department point to the overall success of the 2022 Rapid Rehousing Program, except for the 42 people that the advocates are trying to help, which moved nearly 200 people into places of their own. All right, here we go with the funky numbers. Nearly 200 people. Was that 175? Was that 199? Just how much rounding is going on with this? Especially in a situation where the exact number of 42 of people who are at risk of losing their houses is clearly named. Now, further down in the article, they mention 198 people. Further down in the article, they mentioned that it was 198 people who were housed. There's no reason why they couldn't have reproduced and printed that number here. But the point that I'm making here is they're using a generalized term, being less specific as possible. They're going to do it in other ways subtly in the article here to be less defined. I mean, for a situation that is so complex, why wouldn't you want people to have better and more precise information? So they'll talk about how complex things are, but then they will describe them in as general as undefined terms as they can manufacture. Let's go on. Also, if 42 people are losing their vouchers, that would mean that's a 20% failure rate. And these are not failures of the people who are being housed, but a failure of the city to be able to continually fund the support that they offered these folks. Too often, the city will put failures on the individuals rather than expecting responsibility as institutions. Later in the article, these 198 people were not noted as being housed. They were noted as being the less defined term benefited. So that broadens the range about how they could or couldn't have helped these folks. May not have necessarily been housed. They use the same thing when they talk about offering services. And people automatically assume that that means housing. Not necessarily so. In this case, it does mean housing, but again, we're talking about generalized terms, replacing more specific terms. Using the term benefited instead of using the word housed is just another one of these less defined terms that the news will use to describe the complexity of housing policy and homeless names. Now, to be fair, 2 years off the street is better than 0 years off the street. It's just unfortunate the city hasn't planned enough resources in order to permanently support these folks. Thus, confirming that not only does our current housing programs fall short of the need, so does our housing policy meant to end the crisis. Hold on. Notice the word large. Large is a relative term. Large is compared to what? The number you need to get a sense of the scale is the total number of people who need to be housed. They've been bragging about how many they have been housing. How's that number compared to the need? They hope you will never know. The gap between what we need and what we provide is often unreported. Like in this article, if we paid attention to the gap number, we could watch it shrink and know that we're having success, or we could watch it grow and know that we have much more to do. As it is, the city is more than pleased that you'll never know what that gap number specifically is in relation to the number of people they actually house. Also note the word shelter. This is also a broad term. Frankly, a tent could be considered a shelter. I don't think anyone consider it how I don't think anyone would consider a tent housing. You have you have emergency congregate shelters where you have hundreds of people all sleeping in cots and bunks in the same room. Also, when they mention shelter in this light, they're talking about more than just those who received housing vouchers for the past couple of years. They're also talking about those who were placed in hotels. They're talking about people who were placed with more permanent arrangements in congregate emergency shelters. The city's been busy, but they're not telling you in which ways they're not telling you which ways they have been busy and to what extent. Instead, they're busy hiding the vagueness of their accomplishments or lack thereof. Vagueness of their accomplishments or lack thereof compared to the gap number. Now let's continue on with the article. Giving people short-term stability often doesn't mean that they're stabilized permanently. Homelessness is incredibly complex and requires a lot of different interventions, a lot of different strategies, depending on the person and their needs and their journey, said Jamie Wright, the city's HOST director. We're working with all of our partners to make sure that they have the most positive outcome possible. Commentary. This is basically a PR piece for the city trying to sell to the general public that they're doing a good job, despite the complaints of the advocates here. If we get a chance, I'd like to do a deep dive on this article. We've gone pretty far as it is just with these comments. But I do want to highlight one subtitle that comes later in the article. Different kinds of interventions. This is housing. The intervention that's needed is the city. It's expensive, but the city needs to pay for housing to stabilize people out. But by noting different kinds of interventions, it makes it sound like people's behavior needs to be course corrected instead of the city making sure that there's enough housing available. Basically, different interventions is the city's way of trying to find the cheapest response they can. This is a common trick of institutions, trying to hide their own culpability as that institution or avoid accountability as that institution by placing the blame of their program failures on the victims or on the victim's vulnerability, and instead of accepting that responsibility for failing to meet their needs. The truth of the matter is the city doesn't have enough money to purchase or build the housing for all the victims of our housing crisis. This is partly why we have a voucher system. Vouchers are a quick response to someone's housing need, but as we see, they may not be a reliable solution for many. The real solution is actual buildings. Also in the news, redevelopment of Denver's former Johnson and Wales campus brings, quote, once-in-a-generation opportunity. Nonprofit group's approach is trying affordable housing with schools and job training programs. The community-centered approach to redeveloping the former Johnson and Wales University campus follows a non-traditional model in Denver's redevelopment-hungry urban landscape. The community-centered approach to redeveloping the former Johnson and Wales University campus follows a non-traditional model in Denver's redevelopment-hungry urban landscape. The organizations, plural, that bought the 25-acre property are repurposing historic buildings in a way that combines affordable housing, education programs for children and adults, and work opportunities, all within walking distance of each other. The Urban Land Conservancy, that's ULC, joined the Denver Public Schools, that's DPS, and the Denver Housing Authority, that's DHA, to purchase the property for $62.5 million. The ULC now owns the land. The ULC now owns the land and more than half of the campus. While the nonprofit doesn't manage all of the property's green space, its intention is to maintain its portion as a neighborhood amenity. All right, some commentary. Okay, this is a chance to let you know a little bit about public-private partnerships. The Urban Land Conservancy, ULC, is a public-private partnership that basically purchases and controls the land and then tries to encourage development on that land for the public good. Things like nonprofits, public housing, affordable housing, yada yada. The Denver Housing Authority, DHA, is also a public-private partnership. And also note that despite the word Denver in the title, DHA is not a part of the city and county of Denver. DHA is not a part of the city and county of Denver. It's a separate organization. So these organizations will own the land underneath, and then the buildings, and sometimes the buildings that are built on top. But other times, the buildings that are built on top are built by other organizations, like the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, for an example. I always get uncomfortable with the Denver Housing Authority mentioned right next to the city. I always get uncomfortable with the Denver Housing Authority, DHA, being mentioned right next to the city and county of Denver. It's easy enough for folks to conflate these things and put them together. Denver's housing department is not DHA. It's, as we mentioned in the previous article, HOST. They're different organizations. They work together a lot, but yeah. But sometimes people think that the work that DHA does is work that the city's doing, and no, it's not. Here they are being mentioned together. DHA and city officials are now exploring options for operating buildings in the near term for migrant families resettling in our community as they seek employment, educational opportunities, and permanent housing options. Also in the news, Durango's hotel to housing project financing is a first in Colorado. The residences at Durango will provide below-market rentals for people earning no more than 60% of the city's 76,177 medium-income household. Below-market rentals, now we're talking. This is getting to where our housing policy needs to go. Quick commentary before we get into this. The first thing to note is this project is different than what's currently going on in Denver. Denver's taking people off the streets by putting them into hotels temporarily. However, quote-unquote private partners like the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless have done this in the past, but not in the workforce housing range. They've done it more in the public housing range, which is everything below 30%. 2 new structures are going up behind the former Best Western Motel, a mile west of downtown Durango along 160. They will be home to 24 2-bedroom and 24 3-bedroom apartments, rounding out the complex, which will include another 72 units in the existing building. In all, from property acquisition to renovations to new construction, the project will cost $35.6 million. When the work is complete, the residences at Durango will open as the first hotel to residential conversion in the state to use tax credit financing, according to the Colorado Housing and Financial Authority. That's CHFA. CHFA, or CHFA. It will also provide 120 affordable below-market rental units in one of the tightest housing markets in Colorado. When the work is complete, the residences at Durango will open as the first hotel to residential conversion in the state to use tax credit financing, according to the Colorado Housing Finance Authority, CHFA, or CHFA. It will also provide 120 affordable, below-market rental units in one of the tightest housing markets in southwest Colorado. To ensure that the residences at Durango meet its goals of providing affordable housing, rental agreements will only be offered to those who earn between 30 and 60% of Durango's median household income, currently $76,177,000. Commentary. Most of the affordable housing units in Denver are between 80 and 120% AMI. That turns out to be nothing more than a 10 to 20% discount over what they would normally charge for market rate housing. But that's not where the housing need is in this housing crisis. That's not where the housing need is. The housing need is right in the range of this project, what they call workforce housing. It's the range between 30 and 60% AMI. That's between 30 and 60% AMI of the average mean income. These are all our essential workers. These are the people working at the grocery stores, the baristas, at the convenience store, the restaurants, and yada, yada, yada. Oh, and one final comment. When they tell you that the way out of the housing crisis is to build more housing, they don't tell you the second part, the kind of housing that we need to build. If we're just building 80 to 120% AMI units and think that that's going to help us get out of the crisis, they're wrong. They need to be building units or converting units in the 30 to 60% AMI, because it's not the people who make 80% of the average mean income who are homeless out on the streets. It's the people who are poor. And if we provide the right kind of housing for people that are in low income, not necessarily destitute, then we release the burden on us. Yeah. Now, on to the next item. Property tax relief redo. Critical land use votes. Tax credit mania. All in the Colorado legislature this week. 10 days of long nights and vote marathons begin as the May 8th adjournment approaches. There are just now 10 days left in the 2024 Colorado legislative session, with a number of hefty bills in the legislative pipeline. That means 10 days of long nights, voting marathons, and hectic scrambling ahead of us. The bulk of Jared Polis's land use reform package is still winding its way through the Capitol, though it's nearing various decision points. Two bills. One, to eliminate minimum parking requirements and to allow for accessory dwelling units across the Front Range, both cleared Senate committee votes this week. The parking measure is now headed to the floor, while the ADU bill must clear Senate appropriations. Meanwhile, the centerpiece of the package, HB 241313, is in limbo. Commentary. We'll have updates about whether or not these various pieces of legislation actually make it through the Senate or not. Our standard prediction, as always, will be wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat.
What do you think?
Proposed St. Julian expansion sparks backlash in Boulder. A planned expansion of the iconic St. Julian's Hotel in downtown Boulder is drawing criticism from some community members. Although the hotel expansion, which has been in the work for years, is required to include space for civic community use, some in the community are expressing concerns about a myriad of issues, ranging from increasing traffic to obstructing mountain views to whether the development aligns with the city's intent of the area. Commentary. Just your standard NIMBY, not in my backyard opposition to the proposed development. If the city wanted to develop the community spaces, they will make it happen. However, if this was housing for poorer folks, it would not likely happen due to this kind of NIMBY resistance. We'll continue to follow the updates on this and let you know how it turns out. Additional housing as part of the project is not out of the question yet. On to other news. Here's an update of one of the bills trying to make its way through the legislative session before they close for the year. Colorado Senate kills a bill barring rent-setting algorithms as Democrats spar over companies' role in amendment. Bill dies after lawmakers in both chambers fail to agree on changes. Commentary. Keep in mind, wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. As expected, a piece of legislation designed to help control the cost of housing manages not to pass. Oh boy. A bill aimed at barring landlords from using algorithms to set rents died in the Colorado Senate on Wednesday after a group of moderate Democrats joined Republicans to reject the more forceful House version of the measure. The crux of the disagreement? The crux of the disagreement was an adopted amendment that bill backers charged had been written by the software company fighting against the bill. Commentary. So, a software company that didn't want the bill passed wrote an amendment, and that amendment got that amendment attached to the bill, and that amendment that they wrote killed the bill that they didn't want passed. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. I'm grateful to my colleagues who sided with renters, but ultimately too many Democrats, moderate Democrats, sided with a corporation. They're not with the people. Under investigation for... But too many Democrats sided with a corporation under investigation for price fixing. The authors of the amendment. Against Coloradans who are feeling the worst of the housing crisis, said Senator Julie Gonzalez, a Denver Democrat and one of the sponsors of House Bill 1057 in a statement. Wash, rinse, repeat. Additionally in the news, Federal Reserve says interest rates will stay at 2-decade high until inflation further cools. The Federal Reserve on Wednesday emphasized that inflation has remained stubbornly high in recent months and said it doesn't plan to cut interest rates until it has greater confidence that price increases are slowing sustainably to its 2% target. The Fed issued a decision in a statement after its latest meeting, at which it kept its key rate at a two-decade high of roughly 5.3%. Several hotter-than-expected reports on prices and economic growth have recently undercut the Fed's belief that the inflation was steadily rising. Combination of high interest rates and persistent inflation has also emerged as a potential threat to Joe Biden's election bid. Builders finally making a dent in Colorado's housing shortfall. It's not helping buyers or renters. Only 6% of homes sold in Metro Denver in the first quarter were affordable to households earning typical incomes. Builders are finally making a dent in the state's housing shortfall, especially for apartments. But home prices and mortgage rates continue to outpace income gains, and affordability is worsening rather than improving. Commentary. It's not just building housing, you got to build the right kind of housing. The story with interest rates is that they are only exasperating the problem, said Stephen Byers, chief economist with the Common Sense Institute in Denver. The story with interest rates is that they are only exasperating the problem, said Stephen Byers, chief economist with the Common Sense Institute in Denver. Fact is that wages aren't keeping up with the huge jumps in home prices. No duh. All right, commentary. Common Sense Institute. Need to know these guys. They're a conservative real estate think tank. Leave it there for now. Wages haven't been keeping up jump in housing prices. Duh, hasn't for decades. Y'all trying to make it sound like this is a new thing. You know, you could choose to build less expensive properties. How about building some cute little bungalows? Or maybe even housing that's in the tenement style. But no, you need to build an 8,000 square foot McMansion with half an acre in order to make the cost of the house as high as you can possibly make it. Let's continue on with the article. For the first time since July 2022, home prices in all major U.S. metros, including Denver, rose year over year, reports brokerage firm Redfin. The S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller Index for Denver has home prices up 2.7% the past year through February. After 5 weeks of increases, the average interest rate charged on a 30-year loan has reached 7.22%. This is why we keep track of the interest rates here. The highest level since Thanksgiving, according to Freddie Mac. Purchasing a home was hard before, and it's only getting harder. In 2021, a buyer in Colorado could expect to work 44 hours a month on average to cover the mortgage payment. That bar has moved to 96 hours last year, a 118% increase. According to CSI's Colorado Housing Competitive Index, which Byers co-authored. Denver's police refused Auraria's request to clear encampment a second time. Chief says, quote, no legal way to do so, end quote. Police last week arrested 45 people during the sweep of a demonstration on Auraria campus at Tivoli's Quad. Commentary. And yet they clear homeless encampments all around the city on a regular basis. All they need is 7 days written notice. If there's no way to clear the encampment on campus, then there's no legal way to clear the encampments of our homeless communities throughout the city. Yet we do so on a regular basis. Talk about a double standard in criminalizing the poor. And that's all I have to say about that. Both approaches on construction defects reform appear headed for early deaths. House kills police whistleblower bill. Senate advances transit center density bill. The Colorado legislature began its mad rush into the weekend work on Friday as the end of the 2024 session comes to sight, with plenty of major legislation still unfinished. Lawmakers have till the end of the day Wednesday to finish up bills on gun regulations, housing, land use policy, transportation, property tax reform, and other priorities. Commentary. So, the way this con works is first they'll pass the codes to make building places as expensive as they possibly can. But then, in order to not take any losses on it, they'll prevent any oversight from passing the legislation. So first they raise the cost, so the cost of the transaction is higher, and then they try to eliminate as much oversight so they don't have to be responsible for what it is that they actually built. So once again, they'll use building codes to make the building of houses as expensive as possible. But then they'll use the lack of regulation to keep those said buildings from being out of compliance. This makes them potentially unsafe for the people that are actually living there. For the real estate lobby and the politicians that serve them, it's not about the people being housed. It's about how much profit they can make by spending as little as overhead on as possible. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat.
Fun? You call that fun? That was boring.
All right, here's another example of an article title that got changed from what was produced in the printed version versus what was put up on the web. As Colorado legislature session winds down, property tax reform is still in the air, but progress on other fronts. Lawmakers will wrap up work on Wednesday. The House is convening Sunday. And here's the first paragraph. For the second year in a row, the sounds of Cinco de Mayo echoed into the Capitol as lawmakers toiled on Saturday to find common ground on proposed reforms to state land use and property tax policy. Now, this is what was printed. Parking proposal okayed by Senate. Lawmakers must wrap up session's work Wednesday. And if we click on the article here, for the second year in a row, the sounds of Cinco de Mayo echoed into the Capitol as lawmakers toiled on a Saturday to find common ground on proposed reforms to the state land use and property law. It's the same article, titled very differently. Let's take a look at that. Okay, let's take a look at the two titles for the same article. The original one was Parking Proposal Okayed, and then the subtitle is The Lawmakers Must Wrap Up Session's Work by Wednesday. But you wouldn't know it from the updated article on the web. As Colorado legislative session winds down, okay. Property tax reform bill is still in the air, but progress on other fronts. So, now we're not going to say much about this. We're just going to note that it's different. For the second year in a row, the sounds of Cinco de Mayo echoed in the Capitol as lawmakers toiled on a Saturday to find common ground on proposed reforms to state land use and property policy. The 120-day legislative session ends Wednesday, and lawmakers are still wrestling with some of the marquee proposals of the session, though with some breakthrough on issues that had threatened to chew up valuable time, while other potential hotspots emerged. The Senate passed Saturday a significantly narrowed ban on minimum parking requirements, one of the proposed land use reforms that emerged from the failure of last year's omnibus proposal. The original bill had aimed to ban parking minimums throughout many of Colorado's cities and suburbs to tone down opposition. Sponsor Nick Henriksen, a Pueblo Democrat, limited the ban to just areas along corridors. Senators also ribbed Henriksen by offering an amendment that removed his parking spot at the Capitol. Well, that's not very nice. Plus, in a session where they don't have a whole lot of time, chewing up the time doing irrelevant things. Commentary. If we keep running out of time in these legislative sessions, perhaps it's time to lengthen the 120-day legislative session to something longer in order to get the needed work done. The needed work isn't going to go away. Lobbyists using delay tactics like amendments as practical jokes just keep needed legislation from getting worked on and passed. Thank you for watching the Wright Report Week in Review with your host, me, Benjamin Wright. That's WRIGHT. Homeless news and housing policy, the right way.